Who is James Yeager? James Yeager was a friend of mine. James Yeager ran tactical response. He had a police background, law enforcement background. He had a contractor's background. A really solid guy, and yet he was misunderstood by a lot of people. And rightly so. James spoke his mind. I mean, he just said what he said. A lot of people considered him arrogant, but he wasn't arrogant. The man had the biggest heart of anybody that I know. These are just a number of stories about James and myself, my experiences with James Yeager. One of the things that when I first started on YouTube, and that's been over 14 years ago, is I came across James Yeager's contractor's class at Tactical Response. It's one of the older videos, and it's got a bunch of guys, and they're out on this range. There's smoke, their vehicles. These guys are running around in full tack gear. They're training. You hear guys yelling in the background. I mean, it was just one of those awe-inspiring videos. It was one of those videos that I thought, I don't have a desire to be a contractor, but that's making me think about it. I mean, it was just an incredible video production, but the content that was going on there. Then he interviewed a lot of the guys afterwards to get their take. And that was one of the inspirations that got me kind of hooked on doing gun videos. Listen, when I started YouTube, it was like, I'll just throw up some gun videos. When I really started finding excellent content, it made me want to do videos to get the word out. So James Yeager, I had been watching a number of his videos, and for a year or two, my channel was really growing and it was doing well. And the first time I met James Yeager in person, I was at an NRA event, I believe it was in Houston, and James was standing there. There was a group of guys around him, and I just saw him, so I stopped a little bit behind him and just listened because I didn't want to interrupt. And these two boys are talking, and they're like, yeah, we run the AR-15 platform. And James hated for anyone to say AR-15 platform. He said, what are you, standing on a platform? He goes, what? And he just laughed, and he just like, what is this platform, And it was funny because these two young boys were just enamored by James, and James is just telling them. He's going, what are you talking about? And he didn't care. I mean, James was James, and he wanted you to do it right. He didn't care about your feelings. He just wanted you to do it right. He had had the experience. I mean, they have taught at Tactical Response over 80,000 students. He's seen it all. He's seen everything. So as I walked around and walked by him, I said, hey, James, and he looked over at me and he said, Sootch, and he punched me in the arm. And I'm going to tell you, if I hadn't been standing flat-footed, he may have knocked me over. I mean, the guy was just tight. I mean, he was a muscle. And, I kind of laughed, and I said, man, good to see you. And just kept walking. I mean, he had people there standing around. Little did I know that we were supposed to get together for lunch later on with a company that got in touch with us, said, hey, y'all want to go to lunch? And so I sat right across from James during lunch. And as we were kind of waiting on some people to get there, James and I were just talking. One of the things he said that really struck me and started my real respect for James. He said, he goes, I do YouTube videos, and I do all this stuff. He goes, I could care less. I don't care about YouTube, don't care. I said, the only reason I'm on YouTube is to give me a platform to be able to encourage people to train, whether they come to Tactical Response or whatever training they do, to always be prepared for the fight. And I remember after we had talked for a good while, and I remember after leaving that, I thought, that's awesome. I mean, that is awesome. Then over the years, James and I would run into each other all the time. I mean, different events that we were going to, I'd see James, we'd hang out, talk. Just got to where I really liked him. He'd say, man, you need to come up and train, Sootch, you need to train. He's always telling me I need to come train. And I really wanted to go to Tactical Response. It was about a 7 to 8 hour drive for me, and it's in Camden, Tennessee, kind of in the middle of nowhere. And me, I just don't go a lot. I'm a little bit of a hermit. I work here. I love being home. I love doing my thing. And but I always wanted to go. A year or so later, my youngest son, Grant, he couldn't have been more than probably 10 or 11. He went with me to one of the Iraq veteran shoots, and James was there. And so James was giving the safety brief. I didn't know it at the time because there were so many people surrounding us. I was talking to somebody. Grant was standing right beside me. And I hear this, you MFers, keep your finger out of the trigger, keep your MFing gun pointing in the right direction. And I was sitting there going, who is this vulgar mouthed person and my son's standing here. And I walked around and I saw it was James, and I said, oh, it's just James. And I just turned around and started talking. It's just the kind of guy James was. He just stressed the point. But safety was very important to him. Then after that, you know, it just, again, I would see him at Blade Show, I'd see him at NRA. We did a number of events, saw him down at Big Daddy, and just really started gaining a lot of respect for him, just the way he would do. Now, one thing that was really funny is he would have these parties, like at NRA. He'd rent a big conference room, he'd have drinks, food, whatever, all on his expense. And he'd invite a bunch of people, and there'd probably be 200-300 people crammed into these rooms. I mean, it was funny. But what was really unique about James is he always had some kind of entertainment, and the entertainment was typically girls. And this one event, they were these girls, and they were in these tights, and they were doing these acrobatic acts on the side. And it was really not on a stage or anything. They were just over at the side doing all these acts. And, you know, we really got tickled. I mean, it was like, this is kind of funny. And it was distracting, though. So I kind of turned my back so I could talk to these guys because it was just funny. And James came over and he goes, yeah, that's burlesque, you know. And he was laughing about his wife, just knowing that's just the way he is, you know. And he just likes to have these, you know, make it a little more interesting. But here's the other thing about James was while we were there, he would introduce me. He'd bring people over to me and he'd say, hey, have you talked to so-and-so? Hey, have you met so-and-so? Here, you need to talk to this guy. And he was just helping and networking and doing things for people. And it was one thing I noticed about him. He always would promote and he would encourage people that were around him. He would take people under his wing. And it's one of the reasons why Tactical Response has what they call their alumni. If you've gone to Tactical Response, you are part of an alumni. You are part of a team. A couple of years later, we went down to Century Arms, which they had an event at Tactical Response. And so we go, they were introducing the Canic, and I think another AK that they had put out at the time. This has been a long time ago. Really spent some time there with James. Well, one of the things, James asked me to come over to his house. Go over to his house. We were staying in the team room, actually, so this was the morning, the afternoon before. So we go down to his house. He gets me up in the living room. We just sit there and just talk. Just talk. He and his wife are sitting there. All the other guys are down in the team room, you know, and we just got a chance to really just have a good, just talk about whatever. And ended up going down to the team room. That's an experience in itself. And in James' basement, he has this big area, this big room set up with bunk beds, and a lot of times guys that are alumni can stay there. He was a prepper, a big prepper, and he had a lot of food stored up. He left his family well prepared with a lot of food, a lot of things. Now, one of the events that also impressed me about James Yeager, we were at a Big Daddy event. We were down in St. Augustine, Florida. It was a big shooting complex. I mean, it was a really nice place. And James and I had been talking and walking around, and my family was there, and they were shooting. And James came over to me and he said, hey man, he goes, anytime, get your family together, come to Camden, I will train them, no cost. Just bring your family, I want to train them. And I was like, wow. I said, you know what, I would love to do that. In fact, Shannon had heard it and she was like, man, we ought to really do that. And I said, yeah, I think it'd be great. But anyway, during the course of the time, you know, my family was kind of moved. His wife and his entourage had moved. He and I were just by ourselves standing there talking, and they had kind of broken for lunch. And so these guys were moving some targets, some big steel targets, and one guy dropped the target. It made this loud clang. And James looked over and said, hey, watch out, you know, and in good humor, and it was funny. And he's cussing at the guy and just loud, like James was. But what we didn't know, they were doing an interview right over from us, about 20 feet. And it was a publication. I'm not going to mention the name of it. But the interviewer and the guy on the camera turned around and said, why don't y'all shut the F up? We're trying to do an interview right here. And James looked at me and he said, are they talking to us? And I said, we're the only two standing here. I think they are. And James just looked at him and he turned around and he walked off. Now, honestly, knowing James Yeager, and a lot of people would assume that he would be a big hothead, but James wasn't a hothead. James just spoke his mind. But he also knew how to just let it go. And we walked off. And the guy that they were interviewing, who owned a company that James and I had both kind of worked with on different little things, came up to us later and was apologizing all over the place. And it was like, hey man, I said, it's no big deal. It wasn't you, it was them. But it was funny because later on I ran into James and his wife, and I was with Shannon, my wife. And I told his wife, I said, I'm going to tell you something. I said, James just shocked me and impressed me more than you know. And I told her the story. And I said, I really expected James to go over there and punch that guy in the head. And James looked at his wife and he said, I told you they were doing that. And it was really funny because James did. He had a lot of self-control that a lot of people didn't really know. I know many of you remember when James, it was after the Sandy Hook deal, and James ran out on video and said, if they pass an assault weapons ban, I'm just going to go out and start shooting people, and then posted it. And then, of course, he got into a lot of heat from that, which it wasn't really meant. It was just a heat of the moment. And, you know, he went through some time there, but he got through it just fine. But again, James had invited me a number of times to come up, and I really wanted to do that training. I mean, tactical response, I've heard a lot of things. You know, you hear all kind of stuff. You hear, you know, great things. You hear some negatives. You hear, oh, they make you drop your gun when you get there. They make you do this. They make you do that. It still intrigued me. I thought that's cool. I mean, I like the way he thinks. And so I was always wanting to go. I'm going to go to tactical response sometime. Right before COVID, my buddy Rodney and I had NC Hill. We had made some arrangements to go, and then COVID hit and everything went nuts, and you know, we kind of put it off. Well, then I was watching one of his videos. He was with Jacob Herman, one of my good friends who's in the gun industry and a good friend of James Yeager, and they were on video looking at some of the property that James had bought, and he was talking about a retreat, a survival retreat or prepper retreat. And as they were driving along, I noticed that James had this slur in his speech. It was just a little bit. It was just a little slur. And I thought, wonder what's going on. Wonder if he's had some kind of surgery or something's going on with him. And it was the first time that I realized that something was wrong. Kind of followed along really closely to see how things were going. I didn't want to get in touch with him about it because James does not like pity. He doesn't like for you to, you know, how you doing? Are you okay? He doesn't like that. And he really stated that really heavily as the ALS began to progress. What I didn't know was at Christmas, my wife got in touch with James earlier and said, hey, I want to send Don out there. He's been talking about this forever, and I just want to make it happen. And I want to get him out there. What's the best class and the best time, and what do you recommend? James said, you just tell him that whatever he wants to do to let me know and to come on out. So I got in touch with him. I said, what is a great date? And he said, hey, look, he goes, let's do it this date. He goes, Chris Costa's going to be there. And if you haven't checked out Chris Costa, he was one of the early Magpul guys with Travis Haley. The guy's phenomenal, former SEAL. I mean, just awesome. And I love Chris Costa. He said, come on out. And he goes, instead of just for the fighting pistol, which is 2 days, I want you to come out for the way of the pistol, which is a week. It's 5 days. I said, and he goes, it's no cost. Your money's no good here. And I said, well, I'm not doing that. And he goes, yeah, you are. That's what you're doing. You're not going to pay for it. I've been wanting you to come for a long time. I said, well, I have 2 friends of mine coming, so I'm going to go ahead and get them to register. He goes, no. He goes, they're free too. If they're coming with you, they're free. I want you to bring them. It's on the house, which I really hesitated to do because I just felt like I want to pay. I want to do this. It's a Christmas present. My wife got off easy. Well, we ended up getting everything signed up. We didn't realize it at the time, but it was Easter weekend of this past Easter. And at first I was like, oh man, it's Easter. I can't go to Camden on Easter. And I talked to my wife and she said, you know what, you should go. Went ahead, made plans, got everything settled. We were ready to go. Then James takes off to Ukraine. Goes to Ukraine to help train the people there in Ukraine, how to fight. And to train military police, whoever he could. And had to really raise the money, had to use his own money, had to have ways to get in there, but he did it. He got in there and he served. And I was thinking, well, I'm finally going to tactical response and James isn't even going to be there. Well, much to my surprise, right before we got there, James was coming back. He told me that day when we were there, he came to the range, he goes, hey, meet us at the Mexican restaurant up here. I want you to come have dinner with me. So I go up there, his family's there. I took my 2 friends with me. We had a great dinner, sat around. In fact, Joey, his son-in-law, who is now doing a lot of the tactical response, heading all the training up, was there as well. And so we have a great dinner, we were having fun. I got up like I was going to the bathroom and I went and I paid the bill. Well, James did not like that. He did not like it, but that was beside the point. That's why I had to sneak away. Took care of James, you know, for that, and his family. I mean, it was just awesome. His grandkids were there, his daughters were there. I mean, it was a great time. And as we were leaving, he said, "Hey, come by the house." He goes, I wasn't staying in the team room this time. I wanted to get a hotel. And he said, "Come by, I'm gonna hang out with you for a while." So we went, sat up in his living room and just talked about Ukraine, talked about everything but his illness. And you know, it was just an incredible time. And from years of knowing James and seeing James and doing things, but being in his home like that, it was really awesome. He was so welcoming. He was welcoming in his home. His basement had a big room down there where whenever there was an event, they'd all come down there and hang out. There'd be 30, 40 guys down there just hanging out till 2 in the morning. And James he loved it. He wanted them there. And he was like that. He was a very giving, very gracious host, good person. And it showed when you went to the tactical response fighting pistol or whatever, the classes that he puts out. As we were there, and I want to say this about tactical response. Tactical response will continue. I mean, they've got a team that is phenomenal. James didn't teach anything while we were there. Tim is one of the guys that really runs things. Man, he is awesome. I mean, just a great guy. And then you had Joey, his son-in-law, who was doing a lot of the training and a lot of the leading the guys that were there, the SROs or the ROs that were there. And there were a lot of great guys. And one thing that a lot of people feel, that if you go to tactical response, you know, you're going to get this drill sergeant type thing. It's not like that at all. It's a very close critique of what you're doing. And as you're shooting, you finish up and they go, "Okay, you need to do this, this." I mean, they're telling you this as you're walking away. You know, tighten this up, do this, make sure you're pulling straight out, you know, make sure that you're looking for that magazine but keeping your eyes open. I mean, everything is a plan. And it's all James's whole plan in his class. I mean, everything was set in place. I will say that the second day we were there, I stopped and I told one of my buddies, I said, "This training has changed my life." And it had. Tactical response actually changed my life. My self-defense mentality, what I was really needing to do. I've been to tons of classes, tons of training, but it impacted me like I've never been impacted. Again, Chris Costa was there. Trey Sprinkle, who holds the world record for the longest Cold War shot, who also went with him to Ukraine, and former military, super awesome guy. He's The Last Outlaw is his YouTube channel. I highly recommend you checking him out. Also, Nate Garrison was a big plus there. He was one of the instructors, and I really liked Nate. We really hit it off well. Nate also went with him to Ukraine. I mean, these guys just picked up and left and went to Ukraine because of James Yeager, because they believe in James Yeager. I know John Lovell has done a number of things with James and a lot of interviews, and I really appreciate those interviews, especially with the hard questions that John threw out there. And John's a personal friend of mine, and I love John. John's a great trainer as well. But it was a treasure what John did, because it gave us some insight from another perspective on James Yeager. I know it seems like I'm just puffing up James Yeager, but I really honestly love the guy. And his family, you know, they're going through a tough time right now. But the whole gun community is in a tough time right now. A lot of people didn't like James. A lot of people thought he was arrogant. A lot of people just didn't know him. He had the biggest heart. And Chris and I did a live event with him while we were there, and it's on his channel, which was really crazy. But, you know, while we were leaving, James walked up to me and he just gave me a hug, and he said, "Look," he goes, "I know you're a prepper." He said, "You know, we do a lot of prepping." He goes, "We've got some things we could come down and help you with, show you with." He goes, "My daughter and I will drive down. We'll come down and help you." And, you know, I'm sitting there going, this guy is really not feeling good. Yet he's willing to do whatever. And he would have always been willing to do that. He's just a man that he loves people. He does. He loves people in his circle. And he cares for those guys. And that's why it was a big hit when he did pass, and it was very quick. James wanted no pity, and he wanted you not to ask him about it. He wanted to live life to the fullest, and that in itself is an inspiration. You might not like James Yeager. You may think he's just a pompous ass. You may think that, but he's not. He was a great guy. With that being said, again, tactical response is going to continue. We're going October 1st and 2nd for Fighting Pistol. And in fact, I put it out on my Patreon page, and we have guys that are going with us. I mean, it's going to be a lot of fun. But I highly recommend, guys, if you want real world training. Fighting Pistol is called Fighting Pistol because it's not pistol training or self-defense training. It is fighting pistol. And it's an experience in itself. For you to go for the way of the pistol, that is over the top incredible. It's physically grueling. It's not for everyone. It's not for the faint at heart. But if you're serious about having yourself prepared for the fight, James Yeager's legacy will live on at Tactical Response. And I'm really looking forward to it. Your responsibility to be prepared for the fight never ends. Be strong, be of good courage. God bless America, long live the Republic, and God bless James Yeager.